A 12-year-old girl, armed with nothing but a hammer and a dream, outsmarted the world's top engineers and rewrote history. In the rusted silence of an old scrapyard, a 12-year-old girl named Abigail Jensen spent her days piecing together engines from discarded parts. To her, broken machines weren't junk. They were puzzles waiting to be solved. She had inherited more than tools from her late grandfather, a mechanic forced out of the very company that once thrived on his brilliance. One scorching September afternoon, a sleek limousine rolled into the scrapyard, stranded and desperate. Inside sat a powerful CEO, moments away from losing a multimillion-dollar deal. No one could have predicted what happened when Abigail walked over, her cap pulled low, grease on her hands, and said quietly, "I can make it work." Just before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. We love seeing how far these stories reach. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss tomorrow's special video. Now let's jump back in. Enjoy the story. A girl with hair like fire stood alone in a field of giants. The graveyard of forgotten machines was her playground, her university. And today, she would find the heart of her own creation. The September sun beat down on the endless rows of rusted metal at Miller's scrapyard. It was a place of endings, a place where cars and trucks and tractors came to die. For 12-year-old Abigail, it was a place of beginnings. Her red hair, a fiery beacon in the dusty landscape, was tucked under a worn baseball cap. Her small hands, calloused and smudged with grease, moved with a practiced confidence as she sorted through a bin of discarded engine parts. She was looking for something specific, a particular kind of alternator, one that could handle the power output of the engine she was building in her grandfather's old shed. It was an engine unlike any other, a design born from her own imagination and the tattered notebooks her grandfather had left behind. A low growl interrupted her search. Not the familiar groan of the scrapyard's crane, but the purr of a high-end engine. A long, black limousine, looking as out of place as a tuxedo at a barn dance, was pulling up to the scrapyard's gate. It moved slowly, awkwardly, like a wounded animal. One of its rear tires was completely flat. The chauffeur, a man in a crisp black suit, got out and stared at the ruined tire with a look of pure despair. He kicked at it, then sighed and pulled out his phone. Through the tinted rear window, Abigail could see the silhouette of a man in the back seat. He was talking on his phone too, his gestures sharp and angry. Abigail watched as the chauffeur struggled with the lug nuts. He was a big man, but he was sweating and grunting, and the lug nuts wouldn't budge. After a few minutes of fruitless effort, he threw the wrench down in frustration. "Everything all right over there?" Abigail called out, her voice clear and steady. The chauffeur looked up, startled. He hadn't seen her. Just a flat-tire kid, and a set of lug nuts that are welded on, apparently. The man in the back of the limo opened his door and stepped out. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a tailored gray suit. His hair was silver at the temples, and his face was etched with lines of impatience. This was a man who was used to things going his way. And today, things were not going his way. "Harrison, what is the delay?" he snapped, his voice like the crack of a whip. "I have a $10 million deal on the line, and I am not going to lose it because you can't change a tire." "I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson," the chauffeur said, his face flushed. "The lug nuts are stripped. I can't get them off." Mr. Thompson pulled out a handkerchief and dabbed at his forehead. He looked at his watch, a gold Rolex that probably cost more than Abigail's family earned in a year. "This is unacceptable. Call for another car." "I've tried, sir. There's no one available. Not out here." Mr. Thompson let out a string of curses that made Abigail's eyebrows shoot up. She had heard language like that from the scrapyard workers, but it sounded different coming from a man in a suit. It sounded desperate. Abigail walked over, her worn-out sneakers crunching on the gravel. "Maybe I can help," she said. Mr. Thompson turned to her, his eyes cold and dismissive. What could a little girl possibly do? Abigail ignored him and knelt by the tire. She looked at the lug nuts. The chauffeur was right. They were stripped, the edges rounded and smooth. A wrench wouldn't be able to get a grip. "You're trying to turn it the wrong way," she said simply. The chauffeur, Harrison, looked offended. "I've been changing tires since before you were born, little girl." "Maybe," Abigail said, "but you're not looking at it right." She pointed to the lug nut. "See the way the metal is sheared? You're tightening it, not loosening it. Someone probably put them on with an impact wrench, and they over-torqued it." She stood up and looked at Harrison. Do you have a hammer and a chisel in your toolkit? Harrison looked at Mr. Thompson, who gave a slight, irritated nod. The chauffeur retrieved the tools from the trunk. Abigail took the hammer and chisel. This might scratch the rim a little, she said. Mr. Thompson scoffed. At this point, I don't care if you take a blowtorch to it. Just get it off. Abigail placed the tip of the chisel against the edge of the lug nut. With a few sharp taps of the hammer, she created a small groove. Then, she angled the chisel and gave it a solid whack. The lug nut moved. Just a fraction of an inch, but it moved. She repeated the process on the other lug nuts. Within 5 minutes, all of them were loose. Harrison stared at her, his mouth hanging open. Mr. Thompson was silent, his arms crossed over his chest. His expression was no longer dismissive. It was intrigued. With the lug nuts loose, changing the tire was a simple matter. Harrison had the spare on in no time. As he was tightening the last lug nut, Mr. Thompson turned to Abigail. That was impressive, he said, his tone softening slightly. Where did a girl like you learn to do that? My grandpa taught me, Abigail said, wiping her greasy hands on her jeans. He was a mechanic. The best there was. What's your name? Abigail. Abigail Jensen. Mr. Thompson's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He knew that name. Jensen. It had been a long time, but he remembered. A flash of a memory, a name on a list. A list of employees to be terminated. Your grandfather, did he work at Thompson Aeronautics? Abigail's face lit up. You knew him? He worked there for 30 years. He loved that place. He used to say the engines they built there were works of art. Her smile faded. Then they laid him off. Mr. Thompson looked away, a flicker of something uncomfortable in his eyes. Yes, I remember. A great mechanic. He cleared his throat. Well, Abigail Jensen, you have saved me a great deal of trouble today. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick wad of cash. He peeled off a $100 bill and held it out to her. Abigail looked at the money, then back at him. She shook her head. No, thank you, sir. My grandpa taught me that you help people because it's the right thing to do, not because you expect to get paid. Mr. Thompson was taken aback. He was used to people who would do anything for money. This little girl, with her grease-stained hands and her unwavering principles, was a complete anachronism. At least let me give you a ride home, he said. It's the least I can do. Abigail hesitated. She was supposed to be looking for an alternator, but the sun was starting to dip below the horizon, and her house was a long walk from the scrapyard. Okay, she said. I guess that would be all right. The inside of the limousine was like a spaceship. Plush leather seats, a television, a small refrigerator. Abigail had never seen anything like it. She sat on the edge of the seat, careful not to get any grease on the expensive leather. So, Mr. Thompson said, as the car pulled away from the scrapyard, you like to build things? Yes, sir, Abigail said. I'm building an engine. A new kind of engine. Mr. Thompson smiled, a patronizing, adult smile. Oh, really? And what does this new engine do? It's a hybrid, Abigail said, her voice filled with an excitement that she couldn't contain. It runs on gasoline, but it also has an electric motor. But the way it switches between the two, that's the new part. It's seamless, and it's twice as efficient as anything on the market. Mr. Thompson's smile faded. He was an engineer by training. He had built his company from the ground up on a single, revolutionary engine design. He knew what he was talking about when it came to engines. And what this little girl was describing, it was the holy grail of automotive engineering. Something his own team of world-class engineers had been trying and failing to achieve for years. That's ambitious, he said, choosing his words carefully. My grandpa started the design, Abigail said. He was working on it when he passed away. He left me his notebooks. I'm just trying to finish it for him. The limousine drove through the part of town that Mr. Thompson usually only saw from the window of his helicopter. The houses were small and close together, with peeling paint and sagging porches. Abigail directed Harrison to a small, neat house at the end of a quiet street. It was a modest house, but the small front yard was filled with blooming flowers, and a freshly painted American flag hung from the porch. A woman came out of the house as the limousine pulled up. She was wiping her hands on an apron, a worried expression on her face. Abigail, I was getting so worried. Where have you been? I'm sorry, Mom, Abigail said, climbing out of the car. I was at the scrapyard, and then Mr. Thompson's car broke down, and I helped him fix it, and he gave me a ride home. Abigail's mother looked at the limousine, then at Mr. Thompson, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and suspicion. Mr. Thompson got out of the car and extended his hand. "Ma'am, I'm Charles Thompson. Your daughter is a remarkable young lady. She got us out of a real jam." "It's an honor to meet you, sir," Abigail's mother said, her voice a little shaky. "I'm Mary Jensen. Please, won't you come in for a glass of iced tea? It's the least I can do to thank you for bringing Abigail home safely." Mr. Thompson was about to refuse. He had a meeting to get to, a $10 million deal. But he found himself saying, "I'd like that very much." The inside of the Jensen's house was small, but clean and cozy. The furniture was old, but well cared for. On the mantelpiece, there was a photograph of a man in a military uniform, his chest covered in medals. He had a kind, smiling face and Abigail's fiery red hair. "Is that your grandfather?" Mr. Thompson asked, pointing to the photograph. Abigail nodded. "That's him. He was a hero. He fought in Vietnam." "I see that," Mr. Thompson said, his eyes on the medals. He recognized the silver star, the bronze star, the purple heart. This man was more than just a hero. He was a legend. Mary brought in a tray of iced tea and cookies. "Abigail told me you knew her grandfather," she said. "He was one of our best mechanics," Mr. Thompson said, a lump forming in his throat. "A true artist with an engine. He loved that job," Mary said, her voice tinged with sadness. "It broke his heart when they let him go. He was never the same after that." The conversation was stilted and awkward. Mr. Thompson felt a growing sense of unease. He had laid off hundreds of workers over the years. It was just business. But sitting in this small house, looking at the face of the war hero he had so carelessly discarded, it didn't feel like business. It felt personal. "Can I show you my workshop?" Abigail asked, breaking the silence. "I'd love to see it," Mr. Thompson said, grateful for the interruption. Abigail led him out the back door to a small, dilapidated shed. The inside, however, was a different world. It was a marvel of organization and ingenuity. Tools hung neatly on the walls. Engine parts were sorted into labeled bins. And in the center of the room, on a makeshift engine stand, was Abigail's creation. It was a beautiful thing, a complex and intricate assembly of gears and wires and pistons. It was a work of art, just as her grandfather had described the engines at Thompson Aeronautics. Abigail pointed to a set of tattered notebooks on a nearby workbench. "These were my grandpa's," she said. "He wrote down all his ideas in here. He was a genius, you know." Mr. Thompson picked up one of the notebooks. The pages were filled with elegant handwriting and detailed schematics. He flipped through the pages, his eyes widening with every turn. The designs were brilliant, innovative, decades ahead of their time. And then he saw it, a design for a new kind of fuel injector, one that could revolutionize engine efficiency. It was a design that was almost identical to the one his own R&D department was currently struggling with. A design that was the key to a massive military contract that would either make or break his company. A cold dread washed over him. He looked at the date on the page. It was dated 5 years ago, 2 years before he had laid off Abigail's grandfather. This is incredible," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm almost done," Abigail said, her eyes shining with pride. "I just need the right alternator. Then I can start it up." Mr. Thompson stayed for another hour, listening to Abigail explain the intricacies of her engine. Her knowledge was encyclopedic. Her passion was infectious. He had PhD engineers on his payroll who didn't have half her understanding of the complex interplay of mechanics and physics. As he was leaving, he turned to Mary. "Your husband, what does he do?" Mary's face fell. "He was a machinist at the auto plant. They closed down last year. He's been looking for work, but it's hard, especially at his age." Mr. Thompson nodded slowly. He felt the weight of his own decisions, the long shadow they cast on the lives of people he had never even met. He got back in his limousine and told Harrison to drive. He had missed his meeting. The $10 million deal was probably lost. But he didn't care. His mind was racing. He was thinking about Abigail, about her grandfather, about the notebooks filled with brilliant, forgotten ideas. The next day, Mr. Thompson called an emergency meeting with his top engineers. He walked into the boardroom and threw a set of files on the table. "This is the XT-7, he said, his voice grim. "Our new engine for the military drone contract. It is also, at the moment, a $50 million paperweight." The engineers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They had been working on the XT7 for 2 years. It was the most complex engine they had ever designed, and it was a complete failure. It kept overheating. The fuel efficiency was abysmal, and no one could figure out why. The deadline for the contract is in 1 week, Mr. Thompson said. If we don't deliver a working prototype by then, we lose the contract. And if we lose the contract, we lose the company. He paced the room, his hands clasped behind his back. I have spent the last 24 hours reviewing every schematic, every test result, and I have come to the conclusion that we are missing something. Something fundamental. He stopped and looked at his lead engineer, a brilliant but arrogant man named Peterson. Peterson, what is the core of the problem? Peterson cleared his throat. Sir, the problem is in the fuel injection system. The pressure is unstable. We've tried a dozen different designs, but nothing works. And you have no solution? Peterson shook his head. No, sir. Not in a week. We need more time. 6 months, maybe a year. We don't have 6 months, Mr. Thompson said. We have 1 week. He walked to the head of the table and sat down. He was a man who had always had the answers. But now, for the first time in his life, he was completely and utterly lost. And then he thought of Abigail. He thought of her in her small shed, surrounded by her grandfather's dreams. He thought of her engine, the elegant and simple solution to a problem that had stumped the best minds in the industry. He made a decision. It was a crazy, desperate, career-ending decision. But it was the only one he had. He picked up the phone and called his chauffeur. Harrison, he said, I need you to go to a little house on the east side of town. I need you to pick up a 12-year-old girl. Harrison drove the limousine with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. Usually, his job was a monotonous cycle of driving Mr. Thompson from one high-stakes meeting to another. He was a silent observer of a world of wealth and power that was utterly alien to him. But this trip was different. This was personal. He had seen the look in the little girl's eyes, the quiet confidence, the spark of genius. He had a feeling that he was about to witness something extraordinary. He pulled up to the Jensen's small house and honked the horn twice, just as Mr. Thompson had instructed. A moment later, Abigail came running out, her red hair flying behind her. She was wearing a clean pair of overalls and carrying a small, well-worn toolbox. Her mother followed close behind, her face a mask of anxiety. Abigail, are you sure about this? Mary asked, wringing her hands. You're just a child. These are important people. It's okay, Mom, Abigail said, her voice calm and reassuring. It's just an engine. A big, complicated one, but still just an engine. I can do this. She gave her mother a quick hug and then climbed into the back of the limousine. Harrison watched them in the rearview mirror. The love and trust between the mother and daughter was a palpable thing. It was a world away from the cold, transactional relationships he was used to witnessing in the back of his car. The drive to Thompson Aeronautics was a blur of highways and office parks. Abigail stared out the window, her eyes wide with wonder. She had dreamed of this place, of seeing the legendary engines her grandfather had helped build. And now, she was about to walk through its doors, not as a visitor, but as a consultant. They pulled up to a massive, gleaming building of glass and steel. The words, Thompson Aeronautics, were emblazoned across the front in giant, silver letters. Harrison led Abigail through the lobby, a cavernous space with a polished marble floor and a ceiling that seemed to go on forever. A sleek, silver drone, the company's flagship product, was suspended from the ceiling, a silent testament to the power and innovation that was housed within these walls. They took an elevator to the top floor, to the executive wing. The doors opened onto a hushed corridor lined with offices. At the end of the corridor was a set of double doors. Harrison pushed them open, and they stepped into the boardroom. The room was filled with men in suits. They were all standing, their faces a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. At the head of the table, Mr. Thompson sat, his hands steepled in front of him. Gentlemen, he said, his voice ringing with an authority that commanded instant attention. This is Abigail Jensen. She is here to help us with the XT7. A murmur of surprise went through the room. The men looked at Abigail, then at each other. They were the best engineers in the world. They had degrees from MIT and Caltech. They had built engines that had powered fighter jets and rockets. And now, they were being asked to put their faith in a 12-year-old girl in a pair of overalls. Peterson, the lead engineer, stepped forward. He was a tall man with a thin, cruel mouth, and a condescending smile. "With all due respect, sir," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "what is this child going to do that we haven't already tried?" Mr. Thompson's eyes narrowed. "This child, as you call her, fixed my limousine with a hammer and a chisel after your highly paid chauffeur gave up. She has more practical knowledge in her little finger than you have in your entire overeducated brain. So I suggest you listen to what she has to say." Peterson's face flushed with anger, but he said nothing. He stepped back, his arms crossed over his chest, a look of sullen resentment on his face. Abigail, for her part, was unfazed. She had dealt with men like Peterson her whole life. Men who underestimated her, who dismissed her because of her age and her gender. She knew that the only way to win their respect was to prove them wrong. She walked to the table and looked at the schematics for the XT7 that were spread across its surface. She studied them for a long moment, her eyes tracing the intricate lines and curves. It was a brilliant design, but she could see the flaw immediately. It was a small thing, a detail that was easy to overlook. But it was the key to the whole problem. "Your fuel injector is too complex," she said, her voice clear and confident. "You have too many moving parts. It's creating a chaotic feedback loop. That's why the pressure is unstable." The engineers looked at each other, their expressions a mixture of confusion and dawning realization. They had been so focused on the big picture, on the complex equations and the sophisticated computer models, that they had missed the simple, elegant solution that was staring them in the face. "What do you suggest?" Mr. Thompson asked, his voice quiet, almost reverent. "You need to simplify the design," Abigail said. "Go back to basics. A single, direct injection system. And you need to change the material you're using for the nozzle. You're using a titanium alloy. It's too brittle. It's cracking under the pressure. You need to use a tungsten carbide composite." She pointed to a specific point on the schematic. "And this is the real problem. You have a resonant frequency in the fuel line. It's creating a vibration that's throwing the whole system out of whack. You need to add a dampener right here." There was a stunned silence in the room. The engineers stared at the schematic, then at Abigail. It was so simple, so obvious. Why hadn't they seen it? Peterson scoffed. "A dampener? That's it. That's your brilliant solution." "Sometimes the simplest solution is the best one," Abigail said, her gaze steady and unwavering. Mr. Thompson stood up. "I want a prototype of this new design built immediately. Peterson, you will give Miss Jensen whatever she needs. And you will treat her with the respect she deserves. Is that understood?" Peterson nodded, his jaw tight. He was not used to taking orders from a child. But he was also not used to being so thoroughly and completely outmaneuvered. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Abigail was given her own workstation in the R&D lab, a state-of-the-art facility that was like a playground for a girl who loved to build things. The engineers, who had at first been skeptical and resentful, were now her willing assistants. They were amazed by her knowledge, by her intuitive understanding of the complex machinery. She moved with a confidence and a purpose that belied her years. She worked tirelessly, her small hands moving with a speed and a precision that was breathtaking to watch. She disassembled the fuel injector, replacing the complex mechanism with a simpler, more elegant design. She fabricated a new nozzle from the tungsten carbide composite she had requested, and she installed a small, custom-made dampener in the fuel line. As she worked, she talked. She explained her thought process, her theories, her ideas. She talked about her grandfather, about the lessons he had taught her. She talked about the beauty of a well-made engine, the symphony of moving parts working in perfect harmony. The engineers listened, captivated. They were learning more from this 12-year-old girl in a few hours than they had in years of formal education. They were being reminded of why they had become engineers in the first place. Not for the money or the prestige, but for the love of the craft, for the joy of creation. Mr. Thompson watched from the observation deck, a small, private office that overlooked the lab. He was a man who had built an empire on his own brilliance, on his own ruthless ambition. He had always believed that he was the smartest man in the room. But now, as he watched Abigail work, he was forced to confront a humbling truth. He was not. He thought about Abigail's grandfather, the man he had laid off without a second thought, the man whose genius he had so carelessly discarded. And he felt a pang of guilt, a deep and abiding regret for the first time in his life. Finally, after 6 hours of intense, focused work, Abigail was done. She stepped back from the engine, her face smudged with grease, her eyes shining with a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. "It's ready," she said. The engineers gathered around, their faces a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. Peterson stood in the back, his arms crossed, a smug look on his face. He was waiting for it to fail. He was hoping for it to fail. Abigail walked to the control panel and flipped a switch. The engine sputtered to life, a low, rumbling sound that filled the lab. She adjusted a few dials, and the rumbling grew to a steady, powerful hum. The engineers stared at the monitors, their eyes wide with disbelief. The pressure in the fuel line was stable. The temperature was holding steady. The efficiency readings were off the charts. It was perfect. It was a work of art. A spontaneous cheer went up in the lab. The engineers were clapping, shouting, hugging each other. They had done it. They had saved the company. Mr. Thompson came down from the observation deck, a wide, genuine smile on his face. He walked over to Abigail and put a hand on her shoulder. "You did it, Abigail," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved us." Abigail just smiled, a shy, humble smile that made her look even younger than she was. "I just finished what my grandpa started," she said. Peterson pushed his way through the crowd, his face a mask of fury. "This is a fluke," he sneered. "A lucky guess. It proves nothing." "It proves everything," Mr. Thompson said, his voice cold and hard as steel. "It proves that we have been blind and arrogant. It proves that we have forgotten the most important lesson of all, that genius can come from anywhere, that the best ideas are often the simplest ones, and that a little girl with a toolbox and a dream can be more powerful than a roomful of PhDs. He turned to Peterson. "You're fired," he said simply. "Get out of my building." Peterson stared at him, his mouth agape. He had been with the company for 20 years. He was the highest-paid engineer on the payroll, and he had just been fired by a man who was taking his cues from a 12-year-old girl. He turned and stalked out of the lab, his face a thundercloud of rage and humiliation. The other engineers watched him go, a mixture of fear and relief on their faces. They had all suffered under Peterson's tyrannical rule. They were all glad to see him go. Mr. Thompson turned back to Abigail. "I have a proposition for you," he said. "I want to hire you. Not as an intern, not as an assistant. I want to hire you as a full-time consultant. I want you to have your own lab, your own team. I want you to have access to all of our resources. I want you to help us build the future." Abigail was stunned. She had come here to fix an engine. She had not expected a job offer. She was only 12 years old. She was still in middle school. I don't know what to say," she stammered. "Say yes," Mr. Thompson said, his eyes twinkling. "Say yes, and I will make you a promise. I will pay you a salary that will allow your family to live comfortably for the rest of their lives. I will set up a trust fund that will pay for your college education, wherever you want to go. And I will give you the one thing that money can't buy, the chance to change the world." He then turned to the assembled engineers. "And that's not all. The design for this fuel injector, the core of the XT7's success, was found in the notebooks of a former employee, a man we unjustly terminated years ago. His name was Arthur Jensen. He was Abigail's grandfather. And as of today, I am posthumously reinstating him, with full back pay and benefits, all of which will go to his family. Furthermore, every engine we produce using this design will bear his name. The Jensen injector will be a testament to his legacy." Mary and her husband, David, were brought to the facility. When they heard the news, they were overcome with emotion. Mary wept, tears of both sorrow for her late father and overwhelming joy for her daughter. David, a man who had been beaten down by unemployment and despair, stood tall, his eyes filled with a pride he hadn't felt in years. He saw not just a future for his brilliant daughter, but a restoration of his family's honor. Mr. Thompson also offered David a job. "A man who raised a daughter like Abigail must have something special," he said. "We have a place for a skilled machinist in our prototyping division. If you're interested." David Jensen, a man who had been turned away from dozens of jobs, could only nod, his throat too tight to speak. Abigail looked at her parents, at the tears of joy streaming down their faces. She looked at the engineers, at the looks of admiration and respect in their eyes. And she looked at Mr. Thompson, at the man who had gone from a callous, dismissive tycoon to a humble and grateful benefactor. She knew that this was more than just a job offer. It was a chance to honor her grandfather's legacy. It was a chance to fulfill her own destiny. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I'll do it." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Thompson Aeronautics won the military contract, a deal that was worth billions and secured the company's future for the next decade. The XT-7 engine, powered by the Jensen injector, was hailed as a marvel of modern engineering. Abigail became a minor celebrity, the girl genius who had saved a corporate giant. But she never let the fame go to her head. She remained the same humble, hard-working girl she had always been. She spent her days in her new lab, a sprawling space filled with the latest technology and the brightest minds in the industry. She worked on new designs, on new ideas, on new ways to make the world a better place. She also made sure that her family was taken care of. They moved into a new house, a spacious and comfortable home in a good neighborhood. Her father thrived in his new job, his skills and his work ethic earning him the respect of his colleagues. Her mother, freed from the constant worry of financial insecurity, was able to pursue her own passions. She started a community garden, a place where people from all walks of life could come together to grow food and build friendships. And Mr. Thompson, the man who had been so profoundly changed by his encounter with a little girl in a scrapyard, became a different kind of CEO. He started a foundation in Arthur Jensen's name, a nonprofit that provided scholarships and grants to young inventors from disadvantaged backgrounds. He made Thompson Aeronautics a model of corporate responsibility, a company that valued its employees as much as its profits. One day, about a year after she had started her new job, Abigail was in her lab, working on a new design for a solar-powered engine. Mr. Thompson came in, holding a small, velvet box. "I have something for you," he said. He opened the box. Inside was a gleaming silver star on a red, white, and blue ribbon. It was the company's highest honor, the Thompson Award for Innovation. It had only been given out 3 times in the company's 50-year history. "We usually give this to people at the end of their careers," Mr. Thompson said. "But I think you've earned it." He pinned the medal on her overalls. Abigail looked down at it, then up at him, her eyes shining with tears. "Thank you," she said. "No, Abigail," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you. You taught me something I had long forgotten. That the most valuable thing in this world is not money or power. It's a good idea, and a good heart." He looked around the lab, at the young engineers who were working on their own projects, their faces alight with the passion and the excitement of creation. He saw the future, and for the first time in a long time, he was not afraid of it. He was hopeful, and it was all because of a little girl with hair like fire, who had stood alone in a field of giants, and had dared to dream of a better world. A world where a broken engine could be fixed, where a broken family could be healed, and where a broken man could be made whole again. The months that followed were a dream. Abigail's lab, officially christened the Advanced Idea Mechanics Division, but known to everyone in the company as Abigail's Sandbox, was a wonderland of technology. Mr. Thompson had spared no expense. It had holographic design tables, state-of-the-art fabrication machines, and a team of engineers handpicked for their talent and their open-mindedness. Her team was a motley crew. There was Hank, a grizzly veteran engineer who had worked with her grandfather and saw the same spark of genius in Abigail. There was Sarah, a young, brilliant software designer who could write code that made machines sing. And there were a half-dozen others, all of whom had quickly learned that Abigail's age was irrelevant. Her mind was a thing of beauty, a symphony of logic and intuition. The initial days were filled with a sense of boundless possibility. Abigail led her team through a series of small but significant victories. They streamlined the manufacturing process for the Jensen injector, increasing its efficiency by another 5%. They developed a new, lightweight composite material that reduced the overall weight of the XT-7 drone by 10 pounds. They even redesigned the coffee machine in the break room, making it brew a perfect cup of coffee in under 30 seconds. No problem was too big or too small for their attention. Life at home was equally transformed. The Jensens moved from their small, rented house to a beautiful, spacious home in a quiet, tree-lined suburb. It had a big backyard for Mary's garden and a 3-car garage that David immediately claimed as his own personal workshop. He was thriving at Thompson Aeronautics, his skills as a machinist finally appreciated. He was no longer a man beaten down by circumstance, but a man who walked with a purpose, his hands creating the prototypes that would shape the future. Mary, too, blossomed. Freed from the constant anxiety of making ends meet, she poured her energy into her passion for gardening. Her community garden project became a local sensation, a place where people from all walks of life came together to cultivate not just plants, but friendships. The Jensen home, once a place of quiet desperation, was now filled with laughter and the aroma of home-cooked meals. Abigail, however, found herself straddling two different worlds. At the lab, she was a leader, a visionary, a respected colleague. But at home, she was still just a 12-year-old girl. She still had to do her homework, to clean her room, to be home by curfew. It was a strange and sometimes difficult balancing act. One evening, as she was sitting at the kitchen table, struggling with an algebra problem, her father came in and sat down beside her. He looked at the equation, a complex jumble of variables and exponents, and then he looked at his daughter, at the faint smudge of grease on her cheek that she had missed when she washed her face. "You know," he said, his voice soft, "your grandpa used to say that algebra was just a different kind of engine. You just have to find the right parts and put them together in the right order." He pointed to the equation. "What if you think of X as the fuel and Y as the spark? What do you need to do to make it run?" Abigail looked at the problem with fresh eyes. She saw the patterns, the relationships, the elegant simplicity that was hidden beneath the surface. And suddenly, the answer was clear. She solved the equation in a few quick steps and then looked up at her father, a wide, grateful smile on her face. "Thanks, Dad." "Anytime, kiddo," he said, ruffling her hair. "Just because you're a genius doesn't mean you don't need your old man's help every once in a while." It was in moments like these that Abigail felt the most grounded, the most herself. She was the girl who could redesign a jet engine, but she was also the girl who needed her dad's help with her homework. And she was okay with that. The honeymoon period, however, could not last forever. The world of corporate aerospace was a brutal and unforgiving one, and Thompson Aeronautics had a powerful and ruthless competitor, Vanguard Dynamics. Vanguard was run by Marcus Thorne, a man who had once been Mr. Thompson's protege. Thorne had been a brilliant young engineer, but his ambition had been tainted by a streak of avarice and a complete lack of ethics. He had left Thompson Aeronautics under a cloud of suspicion, accused of stealing proprietary designs. He had started Vanguard with a single-minded goal, to crush his former mentor and dominate the industry. For years, Vanguard had been a minor player, a constant but manageable irritant. But now, with the success of the XT-7, Thorne saw his opportunity. He launched an all-out assault on Thompson Aeronautics, a campaign of corporate espionage and public smear tactics that was designed to undermine their credibility and steal their military contract. It began with a whisper campaign. Rumors began to circulate in the industry press that the Jensen injector was not a new invention, but a rehash of an old, discarded design. Anonymous sources claimed that the efficiency ratings were exaggerated, that the engine was unreliable, that it was a disaster waiting to happen. Then came the bombshell. At a major aerospace trade show, Vanguard Dynamics unveiled its new engine, the Vindicator. It was a blatant copy of the XT-7, right down to the fuel injector design. Thorne, with his trademark arrogance, claimed that he had been working on the design for years, that it was Thompson who had stolen it from him. The market reacted with predictable panic. Thompson Aeronautics' stock price plummeted. The military, spooked by the controversy, announced that it was putting the drone contract under review. The future of the company, which had seemed so bright just a few short months ago, was now hanging by a thread. An emergency meeting was called in the boardroom. The atmosphere was thick with tension and fear. Mr. Thompson stood at the head of the table, his face a grim mask. "Thorne is trying to bury us," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "He's using our own technology against us, and he is doing it with a campaign of lies and innuendo." He looked around the room, at the faces of his trusted advisors. "We have to fight back. We have to prove that our engine is superior. We have to innovate. We have to give the military something that Vanguard can't possibly match." All eyes in the room turned to Abigail. She had been sitting quietly at the end of the table, listening to the grim pronouncements, the weight of the company's future settling on her small shoulders. "Abigail," Mr. Thompson said, his voice softening, Can you do it? Can you make the XT7 even better? Abigail looked at the faces around the table, at the mixture of hope and desperation in their eyes. She thought of her grandfather, of the legacy she was trying to honor. She thought of her family, of the new life they had built. She thought of the engineers in her lab, the people who had put their faith in her. She took a deep breath. Yes, she said, her voice steady and clear. I can. The days that followed were the most intense of Abigail's young life. The sandbox, once a place of joyful creation, became a pressure cooker. The playful atmosphere was replaced by a sense of grim determination. The engineers worked around the clock, fueled by coffee and a shared sense of purpose. But the pressure was taking its toll on Abigail. The joy of invention, the pure, unadulterated pleasure of solving a puzzle, was being replaced by the gnawing anxiety of a looming deadline. She stopped sleeping. She barely ate. She spent every waking moment in the lab, staring at schematics, running simulations, trying to find a breakthrough that seemed to be just out of her reach. She was trying to improve the engine's cooling system. The XT7 was a powerful engine, but it generated a tremendous amount of heat. If she could find a way to cool it more efficiently, she could increase its power output without sacrificing its stability. But the problem was more complex than anything she had ever faced. The laws of thermodynamics were unforgiving. Every solution she came up with created a new set of problems. It was a frustrating and demoralizing process. One night, late, as she was sitting alone in her lab, staring at a holographic projection of the engine, Mr. Thompson came in. He was carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate. He set one down on her workbench and sat down in the chair beside her. They sat in silence for a long moment, watching the holographic engine rotate slowly in the air. You're pushing yourself too hard, Mr. Thompson said finally. I have to, Abigail said, her voice tired and strained. Everyone is counting on me. I know, he said, but you're not going to find the answer by staring at the same problem until your eyes bleed. Sometimes, the best way to solve a problem is to walk away from it for a while. He took a sip of his hot chocolate. When I was a young man, just starting out, I was working on a design for a new kind of turbine blade. I was obsessed with it. I worked on it for months, day and night. I was convinced that it was going to be my masterpiece. But it just wouldn't work. I was on the verge of giving up. I was angry and frustrated, and I was ready to quit. He smiled, a nostalgic, faraway look in his eyes. And then, my mentor, a wise old man who had forgotten more about engines than I would ever know, came to me and he said, Charles, you are a brilliant engineer, but you are a terrible artist. I didn't know what he meant. He told me to go to the art museum, to spend the day looking at paintings and sculptures. I thought he was crazy, but I did it. And as I was standing there, looking at a sculpture of a bird in flight, I saw it. The curve of its wing, the elegant, simple way it cut through the air. And I knew that was the answer. He turned to Abigail, his eyes kind and understanding. You are a brilliant engineer, Abigail, but you are also a 12-year-old girl, and you have forgotten how to play. He stood up. Tomorrow, we are going to take the day off. We are going to go to the Air and Space Museum. We are not going to talk about work. We are not going to talk about engines. We are going to look at old airplanes and dream of flying. The next day, they did just that. They walked through the museum, a cavernous building filled with the ghosts of aviation history. They looked at the Wright Flyer, a fragile contraption of wood and canvas that had changed the world. They looked at the Spirit of St. Louis, the silver bird that had carried a lone pilot across the Atlantic. They looked at the X-1, the rocket-powered plane that had broken the sound barrier. Abigail was in heaven. She was not a high-powered consultant. She was not the savior of a billion-dollar company. She was just a kid, looking at airplanes, her heart filled with a sense of wonder and awe. As they were standing in front of a display of a World War II fighter plane, a P-51 Mustang, Abigail noticed something. It was the plane's cooling system. It was a simple, elegant design, a series of small, radiator-like fins that were located on the plane's belly. That's clever, she said, her mind starting to whir. They're using the plane's own slipstream to cool the engine. Mr. Thompson smiled. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways. And that's when it hit her. The breakthrough. The simple, elegant solution that had been staring her in the face all along. She was so excited she could barely contain herself. She grabbed Mr. Thompson's arm, her eyes shining with a brilliance that had been missing for weeks. I've got it, she said. I know how to fix it. They rushed back to the lab. Abigail, her passion and her creativity reignited, gathered her team, and explained her idea. It was a radical departure from their previous designs. It was inspired not by complex computer models, but by the elegant simplicity of a 70-year-old airplane. She proposed a new cooling system, one that used a series of small, micro-channeled fins that would be integrated into the engine's housing. The fins would be made of a new, highly conductive alloy that would draw heat away from the engine's core. And, like the P-51 Mustang, they would be cooled by the drone's own slipstream. It was a brilliant, counterintuitive idea. It was a solution that could only have come from a mind that was not constrained by the rigid rules of conventional engineering. It was a solution that could only have come from Abigail. The team worked feverishly for the next 48 hours, turning Abigail's vision into a reality. They fabricated the new components, they rewrote the control software, they reassembled the engine. And then, the moment of truth arrived. They put the newly modified XT-7 on the test stand. They powered it up. They pushed it to its limits. The results were astonishing. The engine ran cooler, quieter, and more efficiently than ever before. The power output was increased by a staggering 15%. It was no longer just an improvement on the old design. It was a new engine, a better engine, an engine that would leave Vanguard Dynamics in the dust. The news of the breakthrough spread through the company like wildfire. The mood of despair was replaced by a sense of euphoria. They had done it. They had snatched victory from the jaws of defeat. A few days later, Mr. Thompson called another meeting in the boardroom. But this time, the atmosphere was not one of fear and anxiety, but of triumph and celebration. He stood at the head of the table, a broad, proud smile on his face. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice ringing with emotion, "I give you the XT-8, the most advanced, most efficient, most powerful engine in its class. An engine that will not only secure our contract with the military, but will also revolutionize the entire aerospace industry." He paused, and his eyes fell on Abigail, who was sitting at the end of the table, a shy, humble smile on her face. "And we owe it all to this young lady," he said. "A young lady who reminded us that the best ideas do not come from a place of fear or desperation. They come from a place of joy, a place of wonder, a place of play." He raised his glass. "To Abigail Jensen," he said, "the heart and soul of Thompson Aeronautics." The room erupted in applause. The engineers, the executives, the men and women who had dedicated their lives to building the future, all stood and cheered for the little girl who had saved them all. Abigail, her face flushed with a mixture of pride and embarrassment, looked around the room, at the faces of the people who had become her friends, her colleagues, her second family. She had come to this place as a stranger, a child in a world of adults. But now, she was one of them. She was an engineer. She was an innovator. She was a leader. And she was just getting started. The unveiling of the XT-8 was a carefully orchestrated event. Mr. Thompson invited the top brass from the Department of Defense, along with a select group of industry journalists, to a private demonstration at Thompson Aeronautics' secure testing facility. It was a high-stakes gamble. He wasn't just showing them a new engine. He was making a statement. He was drawing a line in the sand and daring Marcus Thorne to cross it. Thorne, of course, was there. He had used his considerable influence to secure an invitation, arriving with a smug smile and a team of lawyers. He positioned himself at the front of the observation room, a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The demonstration began. The XT-8 performed flawlessly, its quiet hum a stark contrast to the roar of conventional engines. On the giant screens in front of the audience, real-time data streamed in, showing unprecedented levels of power, efficiency, and thermal stability. The military officials were visibly impressed, whispering amongst themselves and scribbling notes. When the demonstration concluded, Mr. Thompson stepped up to the podium. He spoke of the company's commitment to innovation, of the tireless work of his team. Then, he introduced Abigail. "The breakthrough that made this engine possible," he said, his voice filled with pride, "did not come from a committee or a focus group. It came from the brilliant mind of one young woman, our lead innovator, Miss Abigail Jensen." A ripple of murmuring went through the room as Abigail, looking impossibly small in the vast, sterile auditorium, walked to the podium. She wore a simple dress and a lab coat, the Thompson Award for Innovation pinned to her lapel. Before she could speak, Marcus Thorne's voice boomed from the front row. "This is a farce," he shouted, standing up. "Are we really supposed to believe that this child is responsible for this? It's a marketing gimmick, nothing more. A pathetic attempt by a failing company to hide its own incompetence behind a cute story." The room fell into a shocked silence. The military officials looked uncomfortable. Mr. Thompson's face hardened, and he started to step forward, but Abigail put a small hand on his arm, stopping him. She looked at Thorne, not with fear or anger, but with a calm, steady gaze. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice clear and amplified by the microphone. "I understand why you might think that. It is unusual, but genius doesn't care about age. And the truth doesn't care about skepticism. The science speaks for itself." She turned to the large screen behind her and began to speak. She didn't use flashy graphics or corporate jargon. She just talked, explaining the principles of thermodynamics, the challenges of heat dissipation in a closed system, and the elegant, nature-inspired solution of the biomimetic cooling fins. She spoke with a passion and a clarity that was mesmerizing. She made the complex simple, the esoteric understandable. She wasn't reciting a speech, she was teaching a masterclass. When she finished, the room was silent for a moment, and then it erupted in spontaneous applause. The military generals were on their feet, their faces lit with admiration. Thorne was apoplectic. His face was red, his fists clenched. "Lies. It's all a lucky guess. A fluke. You have no proof that this child is anything more than a puppet." "On the contrary, Mr. Thorne," Mr. Thompson said, stepping up beside Abigail. His voice was dangerously quiet. "We have all the proof we need, and not just about the XT8. On the screen behind them, Abigail's presentation was replaced by a series of documents. Internal Vanguard emails, encrypted file transfers, dated schematics. "For the past several weeks," Mr. Thompson explained, "my security team has been conducting an investigation. We were curious how your Vindicator engine, which you claim to have been developing for years, managed to be a near-perfect replica of our XT7. A design, I might add, that was based on the private notebooks of the late Arthur Jensen." He pointed to a document on the screen. It was a file directory from a server dated 6 years ago. When we terminated Arthur Jensen's employment, his workstation was put into storage. No one thought to properly wipe the hard drive. It contained all of his personal project files, including the foundational designs for a direct injection fuel system. He then displayed a second document, a digital receipt. "And here is the record of that hard drive being sold as scrap electronics to a shell corporation. A corporation that, with a little digging, we traced back to you, Marcus." Thorne's face went white. He looked like he had been punched in the gut. "You didn't just steal our design," Mr. Thompson said, his voice ringing with righteous fury. "You stole it from a dead man. You stole the legacy of a hero. You built your company on a foundation of lies and theft." He looked out at the audience, at the shocked faces of the generals and the journalists who were now scribbling furiously. "Thompson Aeronautics has its flaws. I have made my share of mistakes. But we are a company that values integrity. We are a company that honors our heroes. And we are a company that will not stand by while a vulture like Marcus Thorne picks the bones of a good man's life's work." The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for Vanguard Dynamics. The military announced a formal investigation. The journalists ran with the story, a sordid tale of corporate espionage and stolen genius that captivated the public. Vanguard stock became worthless overnight. Marcus Thorne, facing a mountain of lawsuits and the possibility of federal prison, disappeared from public life, his empire crumbling into dust. 3 years later, the sun was setting over the Thompson Aeronautics airfield, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. A new prototype drone, the XT-10, sat on the tarmac, its sleek lines looking like something from the future. It was smaller, faster, and quieter than any of its predecessors, powered by a revolutionary engine that used principles of magnetic containment. A 15-year-old Abigail Jensen stood beside it, her red hair now longer, tied back in a practical ponytail. She was taller, her features having lost some of their childish roundness, but her eyes still held the same fiery intelligence. She was explaining the engine schematics, displayed on a tablet, to a group of a dozen high school students. They were the first recipients of the Arthur Jensen Foundation Scholarship. "The key," she was saying, is to stop thinking about combustion as an explosion and start thinking about it as a controlled energy release. If you can shape the magnetic field just right, you can create a reaction that's almost perfectly efficient. No wasted heat, no wasted energy. The students listened, their faces a mixture of awe and intense concentration. They were kids from all walks of life, from inner-city schools and rural towns, united by a shared passion for taking things apart and putting them back together again. In their eyes, Abigail was more than a mentor. She was a legend. Mr. Thompson watched from a short distance away, a quiet smile on his face. He was older now, his hair completely white, but his eyes were clearer, his posture more relaxed than it had been in years. He had handed over the day-to-day operations of the company to a trusted successor and now spent most of his time overseeing the foundation. He had found that building futures was far more satisfying than building an empire. He walked over to join the group. "Don't let her fool you," he said to the students, his tone warm and avuncular. "She makes it sound easy, but what she's describing is something that physicists have been dreaming about for 100 years. Abigail rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. Her relationship with Mr. Thompson had evolved over the years into something that was part mentor-mentee, part grandfather-granddaughter. He was the one who helped her navigate the complexities of corporate life, and she was the one who constantly reminded him of the boundless power of a curious mind. As the students boarded a bus to take them back to their dorms, Abigail and Mr. Thompson stood in silence for a moment, watching the last rays of sunlight glint off the drone's silver skin. "He would have been proud of you," Mr. Thompson said quietly. "Your grandfather. I think he would have been proud of you, too," Abigail replied. She looked at him. "You didn't have to do any of this. The foundation, the scholarships. You could have just taken the win and walked away." "A few years ago, I would have," he admitted. "But you and your grandfather taught me that a company is more than just a balance sheet. It's a legacy. It's about what you leave behind." He looked out at the horizon. Arthur Jensen left behind a legacy of integrity and brilliance. And you, Abigail, are building on that legacy, creating a future that he could only have dreamed of. The ground crew began to prepare the XT-10 for its maiden flight. The hum of its engine was a barely audible whisper, a sound of pure, clean power. It lifted off the ground, not with a roar, but with a silent, graceful ascent, climbing into the twilight sky. They watched it go, a small, silver star against the deepening darkness. It was more than just a machine. It was a testament to a promise kept, a legacy honored, and a future that had been saved by a little girl with grease on her hands and fire in her heart, who had looked at a broken world and said, "I can make it work." Thank you for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and share your thoughts below. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Stay tuned for more immersive stories.